Some mysteries seem unsolvable until fate, chance, or sheer accident unlocks the truth in ways no one could ever predict. 15. The sweet potato. Clue. How a root vegetable cracked a crime. Sometimes the smallest, strangest clue can be the one that breaks a case wide open. In Massachusetts, a man was arrested and charged with attempted armed robbery in February 2016, and the key piece of evidence wasn't a weapon or security footage. It was a sweet potato. The bizarre case began when police in New Bedford responded to a reported robbery at a convenience store. A masked man had entered the store late at night, allegedly brandishing a gun and demanding cash. The clerk, startled but uncooperative, didn't hand anything over, and the suspect fled empty-handed. But when police canvassed the scene, they discovered something odd nearby. A discarded sweet potato, hollowed out on one end. It looked ordinary, just a chunk of vegetable, but detectives suspected it wasn't just litter. It resembled something they'd only heard about in training, a makeshift homemade firearm suppressor. Authorities sent it in for forensic testing, and the results were surprising. The sweet potato had traces of DNA, and it wasn't long before that DNA pointed to a local man, Deshaun Ware, a 38-year-old with a prior criminal record. Ware was soon arrested and charged with attempted armed robbery and firearm offenses, despite no gun being recovered. The DNA from the sweet potato, matched with his prior booking records, gave investigators what they needed to connect him to the crime. During the trial, the prosecution argued that Ware had tried to use the sweet potato as a crude silencer, stuffing it onto the end of a gun to muffle the sound. Though no weapon was ever found, the DNA on the vegetable placed him at the scene, and no plausible reason was given for why it would have been there otherwise. The case raised eyebrows in the courtroom and made headlines across the country for its strange forensic twist. But for the jury, the evidence was enough. Ware was convicted and later sentenced to up to 7 years in prison. It wasn't surveillance footage or a witness that sealed the case. It was a piece of produce, carelessly dropped, quietly holding the truth. Because sometimes the most unlikely object in a crime scene ends up being the loudest witness of all. 14th finger lick in evidence. How a KFC receipt solved a crime. In April 2017, the body of Samantha Repkina, a 27-year-old woman from Oklahoma, was discovered in a remote wooded area near the Arkansas River. She had been shot and left in a field, a tragic end that left police with few immediate leads. But investigators soon found something critical, a KFC receipt. The slip of paper, barely noticeable at first, was discovered inside the victim's car. It was dated the day before her death and showed 2 meals purchased, strongly suggesting Samantha wasn't alone that evening. Surveillance footage from the restaurant confirmed it. Samantha had been dining with a man, Jonathan Sutton, her ex-boyfriend. At the time, Sutton had claimed he hadn't seen her, but the receipt and the KFC security footage told a different story. The two had clearly met up the night before she died. Using the timestamp on the receipt, police retraced the couple's movements. Phone records and location data showed they had traveled together after leaving the restaurant, and Sutton's phone later pinged near the area where Samantha's body was found. The final clue. Sutton had used Samantha's phone to send messages to himself, attempting to make it look like she was still alive and reaching out to him after their dinner. But digital forensics revealed the truth. Those texts were sent after she had already been killed. Faced with a growing web of evidence, Sutton was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The case was chilling, but what brought it together was unexpectedly simple: a receipt from a fried chicken restaurant. What began as a casual dinner became the timestamp that unraveled a cover-up. At trial, the receipt, surveillance footage, and digital data all lined up to show that Sutton had lied about seeing Samantha and had tried to manipulate the timeline of her final moments. He was convicted in 2019 and sentenced to life in prison without parole. For investigators, it was a reminder that sometimes the smallest pieces of trash, an old receipt, a timestamp, a paper trail, can become the thread that unravels an entire crime. Because in this case, justice didn't just come from the courtroom, it came from the bottom of a fast food bag. 13. Game Over: How a Nintendo Switch Helped Solve a Criminal Case. When a young girl's home in Tokyo was broken into in 2020, police were left with few solid leads. Several electronics had been stolen, including a Nintendo Switch. But what the thief didn't know was that the console he swiped would eventually play a starring role in his arrest. At first, the break-in looked like just another case of petty theft. There were no witnesses, and the stolen items had vanished into the city's endless second-hand markets. But detectives focused in on one key detail: the Nintendo Switch was connected to the internet. Nintendo's portable console links to user accounts, which can be traced whenever a device connects to Wi-Fi, whether at home or in a public place. And sure enough, several weeks after the break-in, the stolen Switch came back online. Police worked quickly. By accessing Nintendo's server logs, they pinpointed the exact user account and IP address used to log in from the stolen console. The address belonged to a second-hand game store where someone had recently tried to resell the console under their own name. The suspect, a 21-year-old man with no prior record. He likely assumed the device was anonymous, just another flipped item in a resale market. But what he didn't realize was that Nintendo's cloud system keeps track of every login, every username, and every device ID. Investigators tracked the suspect down, recovered the Switch, and linked him to at least one other burglary using the same method. He was later charged with theft, and the case helped authorities spread awareness about how even gaming consoles can quietly serve as digital breadcrumbs. While many people think of devices like phones or laptops as traceable, even a gaming system, especially one with built-in internet access, can act like a beacon once powered on. In the end, the console built for fun and entertainment became a tool of justice, and the moment that Switch logged in, it was game over. 12. Bitten by Justice: How a Mosquito Helped Convict a Car Thief. In 2021, police in Fujian Province, China, were investigating a stolen vehicle case that left behind almost no clues. The car had been recovered, but wiped clean. No fingerprints, no obvious leads. It seemed like the thief had pulled off a perfect job. But investigators noticed something strange inside the abandoned car: a squashed mosquito on the driver's side door. It was a tiny detail, easy to ignore, but next to the crushed insect was a small smear of dried blood, and in that moment, police saw opportunity. They collected a swab and sent it to the lab, not for fingerprints, but for DNA. The results came back quickly. The blood didn't belong to the vehicle's owner, nor to any passengers on record. Instead, it belonged to a man named Mr. Gao, a suspect with a history of minor offenses, but no known connection to this particular theft. Still, it wasn't just the mosquito evidence. Investigators also discovered surveillance footage showing Mr. Gao in the area around the time of the crime. The mosquito blood became the bridge between speculation and proof, placing him inside the vehicle when it mattered most. Faced with the evidence, Mr. Gao confessed to the theft. The case made national headlines in China and quickly spread online as one of the strangest forensic breakthroughs in recent memory. The mosquito, just doing what mosquitoes do, unknowingly became a key witness, and it helped solve a crime no one expected to crack. What makes this case so unique isn't just the science. It's the way ordinary things, a bug, a drop of blood, a moment of carelessness, can quietly carry the truth. While Mr. Gao had wiped the car down and left no visible trace of himself, he forgot about the insect he'd swatted mid-escape. Modern forensic science has come a long way, but sometimes it doesn't take advanced tech or expensive surveillance. It just takes someone looking a little closer at what's already there. In the end, justice wasn't served by a hidden camera or a secret tip-off. It was served by a mosquito with good timing. 11. The Cold Caller. Mystery: when an oil company's old number refused to go silent. Sometimes the phone rings, but no one's supposed to be on the other end. In the early 2000s, a series of strange reports began to surface from New York City. Multiple residents claimed they were receiving frequent, eerie calls from a disconnected business number, once belonging to a defunct oil company that had gone out of business years earlier. The calls always came at odd hours, sometimes just after midnight, sometimes during the dead silence of early morning. When recipients answered, they often heard only static or a faint voice, difficult to make out, repeating the same few words over and over. The number 212-664-7665. At one time, it had been listed as the contact for St. Werner and Company, an oil distributor that had closed its doors long before the strange calls ever began. Naturally, people were spooked. Theories flooded in, from pranksters spoofing caller ID to ghost stories about a long-dead employee trying to reach out. But one detail gave the mystery more weight. Even though the number had been officially deactivated, it still showed up as active in some directories. That led a few curious investigators to dig deeper. They discovered that the number had once been routed through an old analog exchange, a system still partially in use for legacy infrastructure. In rare cases, those lines could loop or glitch, producing ghost calls tied to inactive numbers that never fully cleared from the system. But that didn't explain the voice, or why multiple people across different neighborhoods and years claimed to hear the same vague message. Some reported hearing what sounded like a man saying, "Can you hear me?" or "Oil Depot," repeated in a slow, mechanical tone. Despite the eerie nature of the calls, no official source was ever confirmed. The oil company was long gone. The number, eventually reassigned, fell silent. But for years, it rang, and people answered. The cold caller mystery never resulted in arrests or a clear explanation, but it became a favorite among urban mystery lovers and internet sleuths. Proof that sometimes the past echoes through the lines in ways we still don't fully understand, because in a world built on connection, even the quietest number can still leave a message. 10. The Pollen Trail. How tiny clues cracked a murder case wide open. In most investigations, police follow footprints, fingerprints, and surveillance footage. But in one case, it was something far smaller and far more unexpected that led detectives straight to a killer: pollen. In 2006, a woman's body was found near a riverbank in Austria. There were no witnesses, no fingerprints, no direct forensic leads. At first, the case looked like it might go cold. But when forensics experts closely examined the victim's clothing, they noticed tiny traces of pollen particles embedded in the fabric. Most people wouldn't think twice about a bit of pollen, but to the right scientist, pollen is as unique as a fingerprint. That's where palynology comes in, the study of pollen and spores. In criminal investigations, it can tell experts where a person or object has been, based on the microscopic biological material picked up along the way. In this case, scientists discovered a mix of pollen from rare alpine plants, species that only grow in very specific regions of Austria. One of those areas was near a remote hiking trail far from where the body had been found. Armed with this clue, investigators revisited the suspect's background. One man, who had previously denied involvement, was known to have taken frequent hikes in that exact alpine region. He'd also lived in an area where the same mix of pollen species had been found, and when his car and belongings were tested, they carried identical pollen signatures. The evidence was invisible to the eye, but impossible to ignore. Faced with this unusually precise forensic data, the suspect eventually confessed to the crime. The pollen on the victim's clothing had quietly recorded her last known location, and it was enough to unravel his entire story. This case remains one of the most famous examples of pollen forensics in action. It proved that even when traditional methods fail, nature itself might still be holding on to the truth in the form of microscopic particles we can't even see. To most, pollen is just a nuisance, but in this case, it told a story no one expected. Because sometimes, justice doesn't ride on loud clues or flashy evidence. Sometimes it drifts in with the wind and settles quietly on a sleeve. 9. The cold case deck. How a hand of playing cards caught a killer. In most prisons, decks of cards are just a way to pass time. But in one groundbreaking case, a simple hand of cards helped solve a murder and gave justice to a family that had been waiting far too long. It started in Florida, where the Department of Corrections and Law Enforcement launched a creative initiative to solve cold cases. They created special cold case decks, playing cards printed with the faces and facts of unsolved murders and missing persons on each card. The idea was simple: distribute these decks to inmates and hope that someone, somewhere, might recognize a face or remember a detail no one else knew. In 2007, one of those cards featured Travis Smith, a man who had been shot and killed in 2004 while sitting in his car outside a convenience store. His case had gone cold, with no leads and no arrests. For years, his family waited for answers that never came. Then came the breakthrough. From inside a jail cell, an inmate, flipping through his deck, spotted Travis's face. He didn't just recognize it, he remembered the night it happened. He had overheard a conversation in prison years earlier, where another inmate confessed to being involved in the shooting. Now, seeing the victim's photo again, the memory came rushing back. The inmate reached out to authorities, who reopened the investigation. They verified the details, interviewed new witnesses, and followed up on the lead. Slowly, the pieces began to fall into place. Eventually, police identified and arrested the suspect, Victor Johnson, who had been free for years. Thanks to a printed face on a playing card, a buried confession was finally brought to light. Since that first arrest, cold case decks have been used in over a dozen states and have helped solve multiple murders, many of which had gone unsolved for a decade or more. It's proof that sometimes justice doesn't come through labs or advanced technology. Sometimes it arrives through memory, through one face, and a card pulled from a worn-out deck, because in this case it wasn't just a game. It was a second chance to tell the truth. 8. Feline witness. How a cat's DNA helped catch a killer. In most murder cases, detectives rely on fingerprints, surveillance, or DNA from the victim. But in one truly bizarre case, the key to solving the crime came from a house cat and a single strand of white fur. It all started in 2001, when the dismembered body of a woman named Shirley Duguay was discovered on Prince Edward Island, Canada. She had been missing for days, and the discovery shocked the tight-knit rural community. As investigators combed the surrounding area, they stumbled upon a jacket hidden in the woods, blood-stained, mud-caked, and left behind as if someone had ditched it in a hurry. Testing revealed the blood belonged to Shirley, but there was one more clue: white cat hairs clinging to the lining and collar of the coat. This would have been easy to overlook, but police knew that Shirley's estranged partner, Douglas Beamish, owned a white cat named Snowball. The couple had a troubled history, and Beamish was already under suspicion. But with no direct evidence placing him at the scene, the case was stalling. So, investigators took a bold step. They sent the hairs to a lab for mitochondrial DNA testing, something never before done with non-human DNA in a criminal case. Scientists were able to extract a profile and compare it to a blood sample taken from Snowball. The results? A match. The hairs found on the murder weapon didn't just belong to any white cat. They belonged to Snowball, Beamish's cat, and the jacket he wore during the murder. It was the first time in history that cat DNA was used in a court of law to help secure a conviction, and it worked. Combined with other circumstantial evidence, the cat hair was enough to convince the jury that Beamish was guilty. He was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. The case became a landmark for forensic science and opened the door for the use of animal DNA in solving crimes. Cats, it turns out, are meticulous groomers, and their fur gets everywhere, even on killers who don't think twice about what they're leaving behind. So while Snowball never took the stand, her fur told the truth, because in this case, the witness didn't talk, but she still testified. 7th Street View. Sting. How Google Maps exposed a mafia fugitive hiding in plain sight. For nearly 2 decades, Gioacchino Gamino, a convicted Sicilian mafia killer, managed to live a completely new life under a false name. He disappeared in 2002 during a prison transfer and had been on the run ever since, leaving authorities without a trace. That is, until someone decided to check Google Street View. In 2021, Italian investigators were re-examining old leads and scanning digital clues when they came across an image from a small town in Galapagos, Spain, just outside of Madrid. On a nondescript street, outside a fruit and vegetable shop, two men were captured mid-conversation. One of them looked strangely familiar. He bore a strong resemblance to Gamino, but it had been 19 years since his escape. Could it really be him? Authorities zoomed in on the man's facial features, comparing them to older mugshots. Despite his attempt to grow a beard and alter his appearance, there were enough similarities to raise suspicion. But what sealed the deal was a scar on his chin, clearly visible in the image and consistent with older police records. With help from Spanish authorities, investigators quickly confirmed the shop was real, and so was the man. Gamino had been living under the name Manuel, working as a chef and even managing a local restaurant. Ironically, he had posted photos of himself cooking online under the alias, but it wasn't until the Street View image surfaced that anyone put it all together. In December 2021, police moved in and arrested Gamino without incident. When questioned, he reportedly said, "How did you find me? I haven't even called my family for 10 years. The answer? A camera on a car. This case stunned the public not just because of the capture, but how it happened, with the help of an everyday tool millions use to find restaurants or directions. A quiet fugitive, living in plain sight, unknowingly walked into the lens of a Google Street View car and brought his years of freedom to an end. It wasn't a high-tech drone or a wiretap. It was an accidental photograph freely available online, because sometimes you don't need to look hard for a fugitive. Sometimes they're already right there on the map. 6. The unused train ticket, the clue that broke a murder case wide open. In most investigations, it's what's missing that raises questions. But in this case, it was what hadn't been used, a single train ticket that helped expose a chilling truth. In 2018, Anna Stewart was found dead in her suburban London home. At first, it appeared to be natural causes. No forced entry, no signs of a struggle. But Anna's family insisted something wasn't right. She was healthy, active, and had plans that day. She wouldn't have just stopped. Digging deeper, detectives discovered that Anna had purchased a train ticket earlier that morning, scheduled for a 2:15 p.m. departure to visit a friend in Manchester. But records showed the ticket had never been scanned or used. That small detail prompted a closer look at the timeline. She had bought the ticket around 10 a.m. By noon, she was dead. The question was, why hadn't she left on time? Investigators began retracing her steps and digital footprint. Her phone showed that she had received a visitor shortly after 11 a.m. No texts, no calls, just a gap, followed by silence. Security footage from the neighborhood confirmed a man had entered the house that morning, then left 30 minutes later. He was later identified as Michael Donovan, Anna's former co-worker and a man with a troubled history. He had claimed to be in another city that day, but when police examined his alibi, it didn't hold up. The turning point came when they confronted him with Anna's unused train ticket. If she had truly died of natural causes, there would have been no reason for her to miss the trip. But paired with the footage, the timestamp, and Donovan's denied visit, it became clear her death was no accident. Faced with the mounting evidence, Donovan confessed. He had gone to confront Anna over an old workplace grievance. The conversation turned violent. In his panic, he tried to stage the scene as if she had died peacefully. But he hadn't counted on the one thing that proved she had no intention of staying home: a train ticket, never used. Sometimes, the most innocent objects hold the loudest clues. This one never even left the station, but it took the investigation exactly where it needed to go. 5. The Stendeck mystery, the plane that vanished with a final cryptic message. In 1947, a British South American Airways flight known as Stardust took off from Buenos Aires, bound for Santiago, Chile. The aircraft, a powerful Avro Lancastrian, carried 6 passengers and a 5-man crew. The flight was expected to take just a few hours. It never arrived. Before vanishing somewhere over the Andes Mountains, the radio operator sent a final message to air traffic control. Stendeck. Not once, but 3 times. The word meant nothing. It wasn't standard aviation lingo, nor did it resemble any known code or abbreviation. Control tower staff were so baffled that they asked for confirmation. Again, the operator calmly repeated, Stendeck, and then the plane disappeared, without a trace. For decades, the Stendeck transmission became one of aviation's strangest mysteries. No wreckage, no survivors, no answers. Theories flooded in, ranging from navigational error to alien intervention. But the chilling part remained that cryptic final word, typed out by a seasoned operator in a moment that was supposed to be routine. Many tried to decipher it. Some suggested it was a misheard or garbled version of dissent. Others believed it was an acronym or military code from World War II. A few argued the letters were simply mistyped in a moment of mechanical failure or panic. But there was no distress signal, no signs of malfunction, just a clean, calm communication, followed by nothing. Then, in 1998, mountaineers scaling the icy Andes stumbled upon debris and human remains, preserved for over 50 years beneath the snow and glacier ice. It was the wreckage of Stardust. The discovery gave some closure to the families, but it didn't explain why the plane crashed. Investigators believe the crew may have miscalculated their position due to high-altitude winds and began their descent too early, straight into a mountain face hidden by a snowstorm. But Stendeck was never explained. To this day, no definitive answer has been agreed upon. It's one of the few remaining unsolved transmissions in commercial flight history. A single word, sent with confidence, just minutes before disaster. Was it a scrambled signal? A dying message? A puzzle we were never meant to solve? Whatever it meant, it marked the end of a flight, and the beginning of one of aviation's most haunting questions. The man who found himself, Steve Carter's discovery of a missing baby poster. Most people scroll through missing persons websites out of curiosity or empathy, but for Steve Carter, one quiet afternoon click would unravel everything he thought he knew about his life and lead to the stunning realization that he was a missing person himself. Steve had always known he was adopted. Raised by a loving family in New Jersey, he had never suspected anything unusual. His parents had adopted him from a Hawaiian orphanage when he was 4 years old. The paperwork was clean. His childhood was normal. But decades later, in his 30s, Steve came across a news story that stirred something deep. It was about a woman who had discovered she was a kidnapped child after seeing her own face on a missing persons site, a digitally aged rendering of a baby who had disappeared years earlier. The story was eerie, but fascinating. On a whim, Steve visited the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children website. He typed in a few vague details about his own past. Then, everything stopped. He came across a digitally aged image of a missing child named Marks Panama Moriarty Barnes, who had vanished from Hawaii in the 1970s. The resemblance was uncanny. Same blonde hair, same blue eyes, same birth date. And the child had been taken by his biological mother, who, according to the file, had vanished without a trace after falsely naming the boy. Steve submitted his DNA. Weeks later, the results confirmed it. He was Marks Barnes, reported missing over 30 years earlier. His biological father, who had been searching for him for decades, was still alive. They were reunited shortly after, and Steve learned the heartbreaking truth. His mother had kidnapped him during a custody dispute, changed his identity, and eventually placed him in an orphanage under a fabricated name before vanishing herself. No one had ever put the pieces together until Steve saw that one photo. This wasn't just a lost child reunited with family. This was a man who had grown up, built a life, and discovered completely by accident that the identity he had always carried wasn't real. And yet, the truth wasn't devastating. It was clarifying, a story of loss and rediscovery. Because in the end, Steve Carter didn't just find a face, he found himself. Third loner NASA rover helps solve cold murder case in California. In the early 1990s, investigators in Santa Clara County faced a chilling cold case that defied both evidence and time. In August 1991, Dawn Sanchez, a 31-year-old motel clerk, disappeared from her boyfriend's car after a road trip through Los Altos and Sunnyvale. Witnesses believed her boyfriend, Bernardo Bass, had shot and killed her in a remote lot and possibly binned her body, but detectives hit a wall. They couldn't find her remains, her car, or the murder weapon, leaving the case officially inactive by the end of that year. Fast forward 18 years. A new tip emerged. Bass's car might have been dismantled and buried in an abandoned junkyard in Alviso, California, an area that was too large and unmanageable to excavate fully. Metal detectors failed due to the jungle of metallic debris already buried in the lot. That's when law enforcement turned to an unlikely ally, NASA. Experts from NASA's Payload-Directed Flight Team, working with the U.S. Geological Survey and Carnegie Mellon, brought in a Sensator Max 5.0A rover, a small autonomous ground vehicle fitted with magnetometers and ground-penetrating radar, originally designed for planetary and Earth science missions. Its mission? To map underground anomalies in the sprawling junkyard without the need for extreme labor and cost. As the rover crawled over the abandoned lot, it produced a detailed magnetic map. Specialists detected a few key hotspots, suggesting large metallic objects beneath the surface. One location, in particular, stood out, potentially hiding car parts. Armed with these precise GPS coordinates, authorities dug at the pinpointed spots and uncovered parts from a 1979 Pontiac Grand Prix that matched the description of Bass's vehicle. These discoveries offered a crucial breakthrough, with tangible evidence linking Bass's car to the burial site. Even after nearly 2 decades, the criminal case was revived. The weight of the new evidence compelled Bass to plead no contest to manslaughter charges in 2009, earning a 6-year prison sentence. The scientific twist was astonishing. Technology built to explore Mars, roving the planet's surface, had helped crack a decades-old human mystery back on Earth. This case marked a turning point in cold case investigation. It proved that NASA's ground-penetrating tools could map hidden evidence with accuracy and efficiency, even in cluttered terrain where traditional search methods failed. 2. The mic was still hot. How Robert Durst accidentally confessed on tape. Some confessions happen under pressure, others happen when no one's listening, or so the speaker thinks. In one of the most chilling moments ever caught on film, real estate heir Robert Durst unknowingly confessed to multiple murders, alone, in a bathroom, with his microphone still recording. Durst, a reclusive multimillionaire linked to the disappearance of his wife Kathy Durst in 1982, had long been a person of interest in several cases. Over the years, he was connected not only to his wife's vanishing, but also to the execution-style murder of his friend, Susan Berman, and the dismemberment of a neighbor in Texas, though he was acquitted in that final case after claiming self-defense. By the early 2010s, his name had faded from headlines until HBO's documentary series The Jinx began digging deeper. Producers interviewed Durst at length, filming a multi-part true crime series that unraveled decades of secrets and inconsistencies in his story. But no one expected what would happen during the filming of the final episode. After a tense interview session, Durst stepped into a private bathroom, still wearing his wireless microphone. The camera wasn't rolling, but the audio was. And that's when he said the words that stunned everyone involved. "What the hell did I do?" Killed them all, of course. The audio was raw, unfiltered, rambling, almost like he was talking to himself. But the weight of those words was undeniable. Producers sat on the footage for months, unsure how to proceed. Once turned over to law enforcement, it became a lightning rod in the reopened investigation into Susan Berman's murder. The bathroom recording wasn't the only piece of evidence. but it was damning. It aligned with new forensic findings, including handwriting analysis linking Durst to a cryptic note sent to police with the word cadaver, directing them to Berman's body. In 2021, Robert Durst was finally convicted of Susan Berman's murder, nearly 2 decades after her death. He was sentenced to life in prison and passed away the following year. The case became a dark turning point in true crime history, not because of a dramatic courtroom moment, but because of a quiet one, a private monologue, a hot mic, a whisper that turned into a roar. Because sometimes the truth doesn't come out in confession rooms. Sometimes it comes out when you think no one's listening. 1. Unmasked by the Pixels. How a blurred image led to a shocking arrest. In the early 2000s, authorities around the world were faced with a chilling digital mystery. A man had appeared in over 200 images of child exploitation material circulated across dark web forums and illicit sites, but every time his face appeared, it was digitally swirled, masked by a photo manipulation filter designed to hide his identity. To law enforcement, he became known simply as Swirl Face, and for years he remained unidentified, untraceable, untouchable. That changed in 2007 when Interpol launched Operation Vico, a global effort to unmask him. Investigators reached out to the public, releasing the edited image with a plea for help, hoping that someone, somewhere, might recognize him despite the swirl. But behind the scenes, forensic experts were working on something that had never been done before. They were trying to digitally reverse the swirl. Using advanced software and image reconstruction tools, German police analyzed the specific swirl effect applied to the images. Since the filter preserved the original pixel data, just rearranged, it was theoretically possible to unswirl it if they could figure out the exact algorithm used. And after weeks of testing and digital forensics, they did just that. The result was a reconstructed, high-resolution image of the man's actual face. The unblurred version was circulated internally, and almost immediately a tip came in. Someone recognized the man as Christopher Paul Neal, a Canadian national who had been working as an English teacher in several countries across Southeast Asia. With the lead in hand, authorities launched a manhunt across multiple borders. Neal, realizing the net was closing in, fled Thailand and briefly went underground. But in October 2007, he was finally arrested near the city of Nakhon Ratchasima. He had been hiding out in rural areas, but it wasn't enough. He had been unmasked by the Pixels themselves. Neal was extradited, tried, and sentenced in Thailand for multiple offenses related to child exploitation. Years later, he was also convicted in Canada after serving time abroad. The case marked a turning point in digital forensics. It proved that even highly manipulated media, thought to be anonymous, can be undone by persistence, science, and collaboration. It also showed how the very technology used to hide identities can be reverse engineered to reveal them. And for law enforcement, it was a breakthrough. A predator who tried to vanish into the digital fog had been pulled back into the light by his own data trail.